Hello there and welcome to today's video. Have you ever wondered why your students are not able to learn despite your efforts to deliver the best possible class? Well, in today's episode, everything you wanted to know about language learning but you didn't know who to ask, pedagogies are here with Krashen 101 to give you the answers. But first, let's meet David, Monica, and Anastasia. David can't remember to add S for the third person in present. He keeps saying, he works in a school. Monica always says something in her head before saying it out loud. She corrects her own mistakes. Anastasia doesn't like to be called on. She always hopes the teacher doesn't ask her to talk in public. Have you ever had these situations? Well, today we bring you the 5 superstar hypotheses by Dr. Stephen Krashen. The first one is acquisition versus learning, the monitor hypothesis, the natural order hypothesis, the input hypothesis, and at the end, the affective filter hypothesis. These hypotheses will help you learn everything you need so you can understand what is going on in your classroom. But wait a minute, you must be thinking. Enough with theories. Theories look good on paper but have no practical application. These theories don't apply to virtual learning. Give us something new. I don't want to hear about old theories, said every teacher everywhere. But theories can actually help us a lot. They give us a framework and help us understand, for example, why certain students have certain difficulties and how to approach them, what to expect and what not to expect from our students, and how to teach and assess. So sit down and enjoy the show, because pedagogies are going to tell you what each hypothesis is, how you can apply it in your classroom, and then at the end we are going to give you the Pedagogies Award-winning hypothesis. The acquisition versus learning hypothesis. The key question is, which of the two processes is more effective? According to Krashen, there are two systems, acquisition and learning. Acquisition is an authentic and natural process of acquiring languages, like people acquire their native language as a child through genuine exposure and natural communication. There are 5 stages in this process. Pre-production, which is a silent stage when children or babies only listen to the language. Early production, speech emergence, intermediate fluency, and advanced fluency. Children go through these stages since they are born into this world. Learning, on the other hand, is the process in which individuals try to learn a second language through mastery over the syntax and lexis in a conscious process. This is what usually happens in the classroom. But what are the implications of this hypothesis for our classrooms? Krashen says that learning is less important than acquisition. What teachers should do is try to create opportunities for students to acquire a language in the classroom instead of learning it. For example, teachers should create opportunities to receive input through reading and listening. Teachers should let students go through the silent stage where they can read and listen and acquire vocabulary, maybe repeat words and start developing pronunciation. Teachers should also create a need to communicate, which will push students to move on to the production stage. The next one is the monitor hypothesis. The key question here is about error correction. Is it a benefit or a hindrance? So what is the monitor hypothesis? It suggests that there is a part of your brain that tends to monitor or self-correct your language production based on the language rules and principles learned. This can happen when students are speaking or writing. When speaking, the tendency to self-correct inevitably leads to unnaturalness in speech. It appears to be more applicable when students are writing because they actually have more time to stop and think. What does this imply for our classrooms? Well, your students have different personalities. Some are extroverts, others are introverts. Usually, extroverts are underusers of the monitor, meaning that they use it less than introverts, while introverts and perfectionists are overusers. They tend to correct themselves all the time. Self-confidence is also an important aspect of learning. Lack of self-confidence is frequently related to the overuse of the monitor. Self-conscious students will use monitor more and not be comfortable when speaking. Also, how much you correct your students will affect their own use of the monitor. So, be careful. It is important to note that there are classes that develop fluency and those that develop accuracy. Teachers usually connect fluency and accuracy with productive skills, right? But this is not entirely true. There are different reading purposes. Sometimes you will work on reading skills with your students to develop a habit of reading, develop reading fluency, and help your students read more and read faster. Other times, you will train your students in reading strategies and assess their reading comprehension. This is where reading accuracy comes in. The next hypothesis talks about the natural order, and the question is there any specific order in which we should teach? Well, Krashen says yes. This practical order must be considered to avoid frustration for teachers and students who must be ready to go to the next step of the learning process. According to Krashen, a potential order in which children presumably pick up their native language can be applied in the classroom. Learning happens in its own natural order. For instance, you might need to think about in which order you teach certain topics. Because if you try to introduce a topic that isn't next in this natural order, you will notice that your students are not ready yet. For example, as teachers, we tend to teach the ascendings at the very beginning of the learning process, and we notice that students struggle and are not able to grasp it. Well, this is because they're not ready yet. So what does this hypothesis imply for teaching? Don't expect your students to learn present perfect, for example, if they haven't mastered past simple. Meet your students where they're at, in the zone of proximal development, as explained by Vygotsky. The next one is the comprehensible input theory. The key question here is, how important is the quality of the input for language learning? Well, Krashen states that we acquire spoken fluency not by practicing talking, but by understanding input by listening and reading. He also argues that people acquiring a second language have the best chance for success through reading. But what is the input theory? Well, it is based on the comprehensible input that students need to receive in order to learn. Essentially, the comprehensible input theory states that second language learners need to be exposed to the linguistic input that is just slightly above their current language. This will help them understand the new input and learn. Krashen calls this L+1. Providing a higher or lower input levels does not seem to be of great use for learners. If it's too high, it may result in anxiety, lack of motivation, and disappointment. If it's too low, no learning takes place, since it requires no attempts to be comprehended. But what are the implications for language learning? Well, in your classroom, find adequate texts at the L+1 level, provide sufficient input in a foreign language, both reading and listening, and try to maximize the input in English. Teach your class in English as much as you can to provide oral input. And finally, we've come to the affective filter hypothesis. The key question here is, what if students' emotions stand in the way? Krashen mentions that there are several variables that can affect language learning. These variables include motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, and personality traits. Krashen claims that learners with high motivation, high self-confidence, a good self-image, a low level of anxiety, and high extroversion are better equipped for success in second language acquisition. On the other hand, low motivation, low self-esteem, anxiety, introversion, and inhibition can raise the affective filter and form a mental block that prevents comprehensible input from being used for acquisition. In other words, when the filter is up, it impedes language acquisition. So, what are the implications for language teaching? As teachers, choose texts and topics that are interesting for learners and at their level of difficulty. Remember, L+1. Create a safe learning environment where students can experiment with the language and ask questions. And finally, do not overcorrect your students. As you can see, the affective filter is very much related to the rest of the hypotheses.
Today we showed you the 5 most important hypotheses, but which one do we like best?
So, the Pedagogy's winning award for the best hypothesis goes to the input hypothesis. Why? Because it helps us understand the importance of maximizing the use of target language in the classroom through listening and reading. It also teaches us to provide only comprehensible input, L+1, which means that we need to check the text difficulty for reading and listening and make sure that our students are challenged but not frustrated by the difficulty of the input.